Picture 3 race cars. One has a giant fan bolted to the back, sucking it into the ground like a vacuum cleaner. One has 6 wheels, 4 of them tiny at the front, and one has a steering wheel the driver can stretch and pull to reshape the car mid-corner. All 3 were completely legal, all 3 won, and all 3 were killed for exactly the same reason. They were too good. Welcome to Unfair Advantage, the series where we tell the stories of the most brilliant, most audacious, most borderline illegal ideas in the history of Formula One. Here's the thing about Formula One that most people don't realize. The rulebook doesn't tell engineers what to build. It tells them what they can't build, and everything it doesn't mention is fair game. So the smartest engineers in the world don't just read the rules like a driver. They read them like a lawyer, hunting for the gap, the loophole, the gray area that nobody else has spotted yet, because in this sport, whoever finds that gap first gets an unfair advantage until the rule makers catch up and slam it shut. Today, 3 of the greatest loopholes ever found. Let's start with the most recent. In one you might have watched happen live. February 2020, preseason testing in Barcelona. Every team is watching everyone else the way they always do. And someone notices something deeply strange about the Mercedes. In the cockpit, Lewis Hamilton isn't just turning the steering wheel side to side. He's pulling the whole thing toward his chest on the straights and pushing it away again before the corners. Steering wheels don't do that. Steering wheels turn. So what on earth was Mercedes up to? To understand it, you need to understand one tiny detail about how a race car is set up. It's called toe, whether the front wheels point very slightly inward or very slightly outward. And it's a compromise. Like almost everything in Formula One, point the wheels slightly outward and the car turns into corners beautifully. But on the long straights, those angled wheels scrub against the road, overheating the tires and costing you top speed. Point them straight and you fix the straights, but lose the corners. For the entire history of the sport, teams had to pick one, set the toe in the garage, and live with it for the whole race. Mercedes asked a different question. What if the driver could change it and while driving, pull the wheel, wheels go straight for the straights, push the wheel, wheels angle out for the corners. The best of both worlds on demand. They called it the DAS system, dual axis steering. And here's what made it genius in a sport where active suspension has been banned for decades. Changing your wheel alignment while moving looks completely illegal. But the rules only said the steering wheel's rotation affects the wheels. Nobody had ever written a rule about the steering wheel sliding because nobody had ever imagined it. Now, this is the part that matters. Mercedes didn't spring this as a surprise. They had been quietly talking to the sport's governing body about it for over a year. When rivals demanded answers, technical director James Allison just shrugged and said, "This isn't news to the governing body. We've been discussing it with them for some time." Red Bull protested formally. The protest was thrown out. The DAS system was legal, but legal didn't mean safe. The governing body looked at a world where every team would now have to spend a fortune building their own version, and they did what they almost always do when an idea is too clever. They wrote a new rule. For 2021, wheel alignment had to be defined by the rotation of the steering wheel, one word. That quietly killed the DAS system forever. Mercedes got one season, won. It probably didn't even win them the title. That car was dominant anyway, but that was never the point. The point was the idea, and the idea was beautiful. Now let's go back, way back to 1976 in a car so strange it still doesn't look real. The Tyrrell P34, the 6-wheeler, yes, 6 wheels, 4 small ones at the front, 2 normal ones at the back, and no, it wasn't a gimmick, it won a Grand Prix. It remains to this day the only 6-wheeled car ever to win in Formula One. The man behind it was Tyrrell's designer Derek Gardner, and he was wrestling with an aerodynamic problem. In that era, the front wing could only be so wide, which meant the big front wheels stuck out into the open air on either side, and big wheels in open air create lift and drag. They're aerodynamically filthy. No matter how clean you made the rest of the car, those 2 fat front tires were wrecking it. So Gardner asked a question nobody else had dared to. What if the front wheels were small enough to hide completely behind the wing? Out of the airflow Clean. The problem is small wheels have less grip, so his answer was pure lateral thinking. If each wheel is smaller, just use more of them. 4 little wheels instead of 2 big ones. He ran the numbers and reckoned the aerodynamic gain was worth around 40 horsepower out of thin air. The secrecy was total. When Tyrrell unveiled the car in 1975, even his own drivers had no idea it had 6 wheels until the cover came off. Legend has it that when the great Jackie Stewart first heard the idea, he nearly choked on his drink, and it worked. At the 1976 Swedish Grand Prix, Jody Scheckter took the 6-wheeler to victory, leading a Tyrrell 1-2. A car that looked like science fiction had just beaten the entire grid. The details are wonderful. They cut little windows into the cockpit sides so drivers could see their tiny front wheels and hit the apex. And in Sweden, Scheckter actually lost one of his front tires during practice and simply limped back to the pits on the other 3 at the front. Try doing that in a normal car. So why isn't the whole grid running 6 wheels today? Because of one fatal weakness. Those tiny 10-inch front tires were special made by Goodyear. And Goodyear kept developing the normal-sized tires for everyone else, while the little ones were left to stagnate. Year by year, the P34's advantage rotted away, the car got heavier, the balance got worse, and even Scheckter, who won in it, called it, quote, a piece of junk. The genius idea died not because it was banned, but because it depended on one supplier who lost interest. Years later, Formula One simply wrote it out of existence. 4 wheels maximum. And the 6-wheeler became the most beautiful dead end the sport has ever seen. Which brings us to the greatest loophole of them all, 1978, and to understand it, you have to understand what Colin Chapman's Lotus was doing to everyone else. Lotus had cracked ground effect. By shaping the underside of the car like an upside-down wing, they created a vacuum beneath it that sucked the car onto the road. Massive grip without the drag. The Lotus 79 wasn't just winning. It was humiliating the field. Over at Brabham, a team owned by a sharp young operator named Bernie Ecclestone, the designer was a South African genius called Gordon Murray, and Murray had a problem. His Brabham used a wide Alfa Romeo engine that physically would not allow the tunnels Lotus used for ground effect. He couldn't copy them. He needed his own way to suck the car to the ground, and here's where it becomes a masterpiece of rule reading. The regulations banned movable aerodynamic devices. You couldn't just bolt a fan on the back to create downforce, but the rules allowed moving parts if their primary purpose was cooling the engine. Read that again. Primary purpose, cooling. So Murray built a giant fan on the back of the car. Officially, it cooled a radiator mounted over the engine. In reality, it also sucked all the air out from under the car, creating exactly the vacuum that Lotus had and more. The trick was in the maths. Over 55% of that fan's job was technically cooling, which meant cooling was the primary purpose, which meant it was legal. The governing body even brought a device to the factory to measure the airflow and then wrote Brabham a letter saying, in Murray's words, it's absolutely legal. You can run it all year. They called it the fan car. And at the 1978 Swedish Grand Prix, Niki Lauda drove it. Ecclestone was so nervous about revealing how fast it truly was that he ordered his drivers to qualify on heavy fuel and the hardest tires. To hide the pace, it didn't work. They qualified second and third anyway. And in the race, Lauda simply drove away from the entire field and won by over 30 seconds. The faster he went through the corners, the harder the car sucked itself down. It was untouchable. The other teams were furious. Mario Andretti, egged on by Chapman, complained it was throwing stones at everyone, like a giant vacuum cleaner. Murray calmly pointed out the fan spun far too slowly for that, but here's the twist that most people get wrong. The fan car was not banned after that race. The governing body had ruled it legal for the rest of the season. What killed it was politics. Ecclestone wasn't just the Brabham owner. He was becoming the head of the team's association. And the other team bosses, led by Chapman, told him, keep racing that car and we walk away from the association. It's finished. So Ecclestone made a choice. He withdrew the most dominant car in Formula One voluntarily to hold his political alliance together. The fan car never raced again. Lauda's win still stands. It retired with a perfect record, one race, one victory, and savor the irony, the man who screamed loudest to kill the fan car was Colin Chapman. The same Chapman who had invented ground effects, the greatest loophole of the decade, the king of the gray area, couldn't stand being beaten in it. 3 cars, 3 loopholes, 3 completely different endings. The DAS system was killed by a new rule. To stop everyone spending a fortune copying it, the 6-wheeler was killed by a tire supplier who simply gave up. And the fan car, the fastest of them all, and was killed by nothing more than politics, but every single one of them started the same way. One engineer staring at a rule book everyone else had already read and seeing a door that nobody else could see. Because in Formula One, that is the real game, not just building the fastest car. Building the fastest car, they forgot to make illegal. This was just the beginning. Next time, a brake pedal that could steer a car, a diffuser that stole a world championship, and a slot of air controlled by a driver's knee. Which of today's 3 was your favorite? Fan, the 6 wheels, or the sliding wheel? Tell me below. Until then, stay on throttle.